Welcome to episode 55 of the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce. I'm your co-host, Isaiah Bollinger, and back with Tim after finally getting to see you in person the second time, actually, since COVID, right?
It was pretty great. Hi, everyone. This is Timothy Peterson. I did get to visit Isaiah in the Trellis world headquarters up in Malden, Massachusetts, just the other day. And it is only the second time we've seen each other in person, although we started this podcast and we're at episode 55. So that was actually pretty great.
For sure.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I'm going to dive in and give a shout out to our two main sponsors, and then we can take it from there. So the first is Punchout2Go, a global B2B integration company specializing in connecting commerce business platforms with e-procurement and ERP applications. Punchout2Go's iPaaS technology seamlessly links business applications to automate the flow of purchasing data. And with their solution, you can immediately reduce integration complexities for Punchout catalogs, electronic purchase orders, invoices, and other B2B sales or order automation documents to accelerate your business results. Thank you to Punchout2Go. And our second sponsor is Balance. Balance is a B2B e-commerce payment solution that works well for you and for your buyers. It offers a seamless one-click checkout for almost any payment method, including ACH, wire, checks, cards, even terms. And it's used by leaders in B2B e-commerce, and it's as easy as buying a shirt from Amazon. I'll say it again, check them out at getbalance.com. Book a session and tell them what your needs are. They are the first dedicated payment platform for B2B e-commerce, 100% tailored to your needs. Thanks again to our sponsor, Balance. And Isaiah, back to you. We are episode 55, which is amazing. And please introduce our guest.
Yeah, we're starting to see some momentum at episode 55. So it's an exciting time, and I hope this works out well for you in terms of getting more visibility. So we're excited to introduce Garrett Eastham, founder and chief data officer at Open Conjuncture. And you also have quite a few other roles I see on LinkedIn, but I think Open Conjuncture is kind of the most relevant to this. So tell us more about your background. Did you always start as a data guy, or did you kind of somehow turn into a data guy? Sometimes people have interesting stories about that.
Yeah, so I guess I can kind of give the history. I mean, TLDR, I've been in enterprise retail for most of my career. Run, and built several kind of enterprise technologies that help with the shopping experience. So from Edgecase to Vertebrae, and then kind of lead executive or data science roles and other various kinds of plugins across the site. But kind of cut my teeth initially at Bazaar Voice. Funny enough, I came in as a data product manager, or I guess the technical title was technical product manager. And I remember I was there because the guy who was running the web analytics integration for Bazaar Voice left, and no one in the building had enough technical acumen on the product side to kind of know how to speak those two languages. And that was kind of my first introduction to what it meant to be I guess you call a data guy, but it's at least that was more than 10 years ago at this point. So that was the first point where you had kind of the merging of product mindset, product management, and what it means to say, what should we build and why, with the kind of, at that time, it was very rudimentary. How do you think about data? How do you think about capturing data? Where does it go? At that time, that was a very simple feature. It was, we have, a Bazaar Voice powers reviews for a large portion of the world's enterprise customers. And when someone reads a review or clicks on a product or whatever, they just wanted to fire an event into Google Analytics or Core Metrics or Web Trends for when back in that day, or Adobe. And it turns out that that's a lot more difficult than just fire an event. And I've seen that kind of, we can talk about this today, but that is kind of the underbelly of why kind of analytics, especially as it relates to trying to scale and optimize an e-commerce site or anything where you want customers to do something digitally, is hard. I mean, it's not just a matter of capturing information, but it ends up being, what do you do with it? Who's going to look at it? Where do you store it? And usually at the end of the day, how does someone interpret it? And so that was my beginning of data analytics. And since then, I've been involved in all number of various types of web analytics initiatives. I've built, I can't even imagine how many different web analytics systems across the various companies, either my own as a product manager, and then also been a part of like the dashboarding, the analytics side, and the what do you do with that information. And so it's been interesting to see that kind of progress there.
Awesome. Yeah, we have customers that use Bazaar Voice. We kind of, I guess we don't maybe appreciate the level of data that they're doing. We see them kind of as the review aggregator, which is fairly unique because they're aggregating reviews across, many channels, whereas most of the other options in the market are just kind of holding the reviews on just that one source of the website, not necessarily aggregating everything. So, you're probably talking about some of the B2B might have like hundreds of thousands or even millions of reviews across all their products, across all the platforms. So I can imagine it's probably a lot of data at like these large enterprise companies, right?
Yeah. Well, it gets to be large when you realize that it's not just about the text that you're reading. So most people, when they think about reviews, and you as your review vendor, which Bazaar Voice is a big one, Turn to Pixely is a big one, and then now more emerging brands like Yotpo or Stamped. You tend to think of your data asset as the review, the text of someone that submitted it, or even the rating dimensions, we called them, like how does someone classify themselves? And yeah, you're exactly right. Most people don't think if I only have a couple thousand reviews, I would never dive into to analyze that, or it doesn't make sense if I have limited, data science resources to go send that person off to go scrape and look at and, do some keyword counts on, maybe like less than half a book worth or like a chapter worth of text, right? But what's more relevant though is that when you think about how much traffic and the impact that review has on the behavior of the site. So, for example, we saw this in a lot of cases with Bazaar Voice brands that has small catalog, but either maybe lots of content or just a lot of traffic through the site. So LG, for example, like a lot of like higher priced items, higher ticket items that have just lower purchase volume, but bigger brand names, you could see a lot more information from wanting to see how people read content, right? So if you have a small review footprint, but if you have a large, traffic to your site and a small catalog, it depends, how you mix it. But the bigger data asset there was always how do you read reviews, and some of the technology that we ended up patenting in that case was the ability to track which reviews were read and how that influenced your purchase behavior. And it was really interesting because that was the first time we did any kind of big data capture like that work. Bazaar Voice spearheaded what that has now become their own kind of in-house analytics system across all review content. But it started with the question of, our clients are paying for a widget on the page that is primarily consumed in a passive way, and we are giving them insights or analytics on clicks, right? And the CSDs or the customer support reps or the people that we're trying to justify to keep spend or to keep the clients happy, or saying the impact of this product, they were clamoring for some other way to show that. And so our novel approach was we wanted to measure which reviews were in the viewport at a given time, and then to do analysis and understand the story of how does that drive purchase behavior. We found some fascinating stuff. We found out that people don't read more than 7 reviews ever on a product, for example. We think about people only read or browse or compare maybe 3 products at a time. They never read more than 20 pieces of content ever. And so the idea of what content you put in which order, especially when you have any amount of depth on a product, becomes really important. We also found the order of content that you read is really important. Obviously, if you read a bunch of bad reviews in order, your session is less likely to convert. If you read a bunch of really positive reviews, you're higher to convert. But what was really interesting is the most highest converting sessions were the ones that read the mixed set of reviews. So Like we looked at sessions where if you looked at your average reviews you read were less than 2 stars, for example. Those are terrible, right? You're browsing products that probably should be taken off or revisited or something. And then we've looked at, say, people that looked at only 5-star reviews. We called them the high fives, right? The great stuff, did what I wanted. And they didn't have any meat to it. But when you looked at people that, say, read the 3.5 or 4-star, or the average of the reviews they read was somewhere in that middle, they had the most conversion lift because they were seeing what you want to hear. They're getting really good feedback. They're getting an objective opinion. They're getting the pros and cons. They're doing exactly what the BV or reviews as a product is meant to do, which is give you that last mile objective information in a qualitative manner that a retailer can't give you. But then we were showing that the data could tell you, like, that's the story. But then when you looked at the content, you then found some really interesting stuff about what kinds of reviews impacted behavior. And what we found was that grammar mattered, structure mattered. Again, not necessarily like surprising things, but it was like the more editorial a review was, like the more interesting, the more content it had, the more impactful, and the more like kind of well-structured reviews you read that were in that objective manner in your session, the more likely you were to convert. And so like that was my first foray into like, this data stuff's really cool. I could tell a story that both clients and customers could listen to. And then that also spearheaded, a lot of interest and excitement around, okay, we did that in a small prototype. Now, how do we go take that and scale that? And I was part of the kind of founding team that built out, at that time, it was one of the first real big data stacks, and that size of vendor. We were building on Hadoop, like old school Hadoop, like good old HBase, just some really old school, at least by our standards, and 2021 kind of tech standpoint. So it was cool.
So, question for you on reviews. So, I've been parts of studies of various review techniques and whatnot, and again, these are different companies. They're across different companies, not just Bazaar Voice, but really just understanding. Like I think one of the studies said that customers prefer 3-sentence reviews. Like the magic number was 3 sentences, which I thought was very funny. It's like, so not too short, not too long. Another one was that a lot of consumers wanted to look at all the 5s and all the 1s. They wanted to just flip it and say, why did people hate this product? Why are there 100 that hated it? Why? And if they all say it's because it broke after 2 weeks, right? And I think one other takeaway was that people really did like the ability to see photos or whatever, like customers could attach photos within a review. So I found all that fascinating, and most of this was B2C, but I could see a lot of applications for B2B for all of those things, just really understanding.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I will say there is some of these stories, some of those tend to be, one, you want to be careful about vendor bias, right? Like review vendors always want to talk about how good their features are. And the other thing is that what you measure lets you tell the story. And you got to be careful from a vendor standpoint, because there's both the bias of I want to tell a positive story, and I can only measure things that I know how to measure or can tell a story around. So what I mean by that is, the data that says people that like want to see photos on reviews or want to want to sort, for example, like highest to lowest, is that because that's what they had the option? Is that because of what they wanted, or is that because that's what the option was and that's the click event that we were able to capture, right? So the explicit action of like someone did something. What I would like about passive analytics, view stream as we called it, and we're doing a lot of that with Open Conjecture now, but is the ability to capture, what is really, in my mind, like the larger data set. So, which is what you see impacts how you browse and experience, and really what you click on and engage with from not even e-commerce, just a website period, is actually a very small part of the entire way you process information and the way that impacts what you're going to do. And like on a side note, actually, like my other gig is actually in totally different e-commerce. We're doing VR-based eye tracking, analyzing concussions for medical devices, and same analytics, approach, acumen kind of background. But what I found there is that there's a whole wealth of information about what you look at, how that impacts how you process it, And that's, medical use case, but the same thing applies again in e-commerce, right? And so what I'll leave you with that point is one of the stats I found in the Bazaar Voice study was that we were trying to get to a metric of, well, we know that people when they click read all reviews, they convert really high, but we only know that like maybe a small few basis points of people actually click that button on a product page that loads, and which is okay. But you're trying to say, I want to claim a higher portion of the revenue, attributable revenue for a product because you're a SaaS vendor trying to sell, either upsell or whatever, or justify your fee. So I want to be able to say that I know intuitively that reviews are important for people making purchase decisions. There's not really a good way to A/B test that, for example, but could you give some insight into how many people are reading reviews? How far do they go? Especially in a scenario where it's a very passive product, right? Like you don't tend to click on sort reviews unless you're really far down the funnel and you've got something that you're looking for. So yeah, you're going to be higher converting. What I thought was interesting is that when you looked at passive viewership, it was something like one of our pilot clients was Travelocity. I think I can say that back in the day. And reviews are incredibly important for hotels, obviously, like one of the most important pieces that you look at for room buying.
Yeah,
we found that
I don't think anyone I know would ever get a hotel that doesn't have a review. Like,
I'm here.
Yeah. It was something like more than 50% of product page visits that had reviews spent time browsing reviews in some substantial way. And it was something that you could only find when you measured it in a different way, which is kind of like one of the broader themes that as we're thinking about how we can talk about the B2B use case. I really want to make sure we kind of cover it because the same scenario I saw in B2C as that progressed over my career, where people got more and more familiar with the ideas of like, oh, I got to track a click. I got to track, a click or an event, right? And I got to be able to go look at what that event was worth. I kind of moved from, the old school systems like Adobe to more modern data stacks like Segment, and kind of what we're now doing is bringing that in-house. But with, B2B, you have a whole bunch of new different problems. You have the same scenario of I have people that are moving from an offline, very qualitative human organic interaction to a digital first or digitally assisted interaction that suddenly I lose so much of the natural signal that I would get from my business, my sales reps, right? The something as simple as like the eye gaze, the emotional, like the aspects that I have when I see you, which we get somewhat with Zoom, but everyone's always talked about how, it's not the same selling over Zoom. But then the more subtle pieces like the intent signals of how do you stand next to, I do a lot of work with a luxury furniture client out of New York that sells kids furniture. How do you stand next to a crib in a showroom is indicative of your intent, right? Are you, huddled over it? Are you passively browsing? Are you, is that in like the last stage of your visit? There's so many aspects that a very trained sales rep that might be in the showroom would pick up on that. Again, they might never actually explicitly say that's the algorithm metric for identifying intent, but that's when you play it back to them, that's how I describe it. And a lot of what I see in the B2B use case is how do you kind of, tell the analytic story that relates that to people that can recognize that? And then on the reverse side, how do you capture the data that's going to let someone tell that story vice versa, right? Like there's a whole learning curve in that case to get around.
So I think B2B is challenging around all this stuff for several reasons. One, they're just usually most of these organizations aren't as data driven from like a e-commerce standpoint because they don't have a 10-year-old e-commerce infrastructure of years of data that most of the retail companies and B2C companies have been doing for 10, 20 years. They might be just starting out, or it's still like some 5-10% of their sales. And the other thing is, so let's just say it's their early level, which is common, 15%, right? 15% online. It's like a common B2B company where most is on the phone or through a sales rep, whatever, and then a little bit is online. That 15%, the other problem is that their average order value is generally pretty high with B2B. So that 15% might only be like 5 orders a week or like some really small number. Like I've been looking at some customers and it's like, so they don't have this like massive volume of data, and they also generally don't have reviews. Like I noticed, at Trellis, we mostly work with more small mid-market companies. We do have obviously some enterprise customers, but these mid-market companies, like they don't have sophisticated, especially I'm talking mainly B2B guys, don't generally, a lot of them, they might have review functionality, but they have barely any reviews or literally almost non-existent reviews, or it's such a small, like it's so like far down their list of things that they're thinking about, and like they're just trying to like get the system to work. Like half the time our conversations are like, well, like our platform like barely works. Like we have like leads like that where it's just like like they want to hire us to make it work. Like that's why they're hiring us, just to get it like functionally working.
No, I love some of like the stuff you've been doing from like what I've seen from the case study piece. I think what I'll say on that standpoint, that's one of the pillars I had written down. The issue from a customer analytics standpoint for B2B is all the problems you just mentioned, but just from a data lens, or like how do I understand and optimize and make that better? Whether it's like, is it working or not? That's on and off, yes. But in okay, we're getting 5 orders a week. Is that good? Or should we be getting 7, 10, 3, whatever? Like the issue is you have small scale, right? So your conversion rate is low, or your customer set's low, or something about just you're not, like the product is not a mass consumer thing. It's a niche and focus and higher average order value, which is fine. But then the other issue is you have a complex product usually. So a lot of like customization, a lot of diversity. Like I imagine a big problem in B2B for a lot of what you guys are saying is that how do you orient the product catalog from a SKU standpoint, right? Like do SKUs even make sense if you've got something that's by nature like a bespoke quote, right? And then are you moving towards more kind of like a lead to manage down piece? But what happens there is that when you have
the quote, like cart to quote is what we call it, where they're creating a cart, but they're actually requesting a quote on that cart. So it's like an assisted sale, right? It's kind of to your point, it's a digital assistant sale, not necessarily like a full sales cycle automated,
So what that creates pressure on is when you have small scale of data collection merged with a very heterogeneous product set, you've got very limited signal, right? Like, so like you have imagine like like you're putting poker chips, or like probably more like a roulette chip or whatever, across your different bets, because you're trying to get insight. So from a data scientist standpoint, or just analytics, I want to know which one's doing better than not. So let's say something like if you had 5 variants of product, and you had 100 people visiting your site, and you knew the order of which ones bought which of those 5 variants, that's very different signal than I have 500 variants to 50 visits, and most of those never show up. And so the issue ends up being that when you try to retell that story of what the heck is going on, how do I start to get any kind of insight, directionally about who my customer is, how they're making buying decisions, you're kind of, you have the B2B challenge of small scale and complexity. And so to help solve that, usually what you end up doing is you either move to kind of qualitative stuff. So moving as much as possible to your normal messaging channels, so chat, email, or surveys, anywhere where you can get text, obviously from either it's feedback or direct or whatever. And then the other piece is that you have some way to group, or taxonomy. You have some superset of way to merge and align, even if it's a complex sale, some way to group them in a way that you can start seeing some signal. And depending upon what you're working on, so if you have like a cart to quote, it could be you look at the text associated with the conversation that was had in that quote to try and pull out some way to suss out characteristics of that order, that sales, that customer journey from some other piece. Even if they ended up at totally bespoke things, you're trying to kind of roll them up in some way that, and from an analyst standpoint, you can be able to give context and guidance on what should we do next, what our customers doing, right?
Yeah. So a couple things I want to circle back to, because you brought up some really interesting topics that our listeners haven't heard enough of, I think, in recent episodes, and one of those is really VR, and I want to bring up a couple things about that. You also mentioned LG. So I worked on a project with LG a little while ago, and it was a sentiment monitoring project for physical retail and showrooms for B2B, right? So think about that concept for a minute. You have all of these, let's say, LG appliances or TV screens or what have you. And in that physical space, they have monitors seeing, am I smiling? This is pre-COVID, right? So smiling when I'm looking at a particular screen, which items am I going to see in which order? Am I going back and forth? Have I visited that particular product 3 times in the physical space? Things like that. Am I reading the card or not? Right. And so what they did is they then used that for both B2B and B2C e-commerce, and figuring out, well, wait a minute, what order do I see these things? What order should I put them on the page? Customers looked at this one more often. It is going to be the feature. Right. And so they kind of fed these back and forth in a loop. What do you think about that sort of stuff? That was one of the first experiences I had where people are taking the physical and bringing it to e-commerce in that way.
Sure. So the technical data science term would be that's transfer learning, right? You have some model that you're training in the physical world, and you assume there's some signal there that is not being captured in the digital world, right? I think it's great. My one immediate thought, Spidey sense says, there's a trade-off of how difficult it is to get that information to model it versus the upside, right? So like one of the things that some of the analytics folks that I always I really love and respect always kind of preach to me is what is the cost benefit of doing it yourself versus just getting something off the shelf or focusing your time and effort on something else, right? But that being said, like I agree with you that especially for something that has like a low perch, like again, like the scale probably talked about, like low scale of someone that maybe especially on that higher end of goods that might be kind of like at the higher price point. You can't get enough people to visit that page to get some kind of signal, but you have a different context where there's rich signals of people already doing behaviors that you want to capture. Which I love that. And so especially from a B2B standpoint of there's already showrooms, there's already people doing this stuff, there's already a data set or source there. I think it's great. I think then the question becomes, what are the kinds of things that you can transfer over? How broadly, usable is that? I think it's, especially in an LG case, it's really interesting because the same SKU catalog goes both ways. But I could also see a scenario where if you go one level up of the abstraction, so instead of trying to get really nerdy here, right? So if you're building your recommender engine and you've got users to products, right? And you say, I'm gathering some data in the showroom that's going to help me like make my users to products matrix better. And I want to go take it on the website. Like instead of saying like the products on the showroom have to exact the exact products on the website, could you have some in middle abstraction that is, it could be what Google calls a flock, so a federated learning, a cohort, a concept of a customer, or a description, we'd call them a persona or segment, a grouping or a category, or a way to group products or features of those products that I can kind of, make that, imagine that matrix getting smaller. And then when you gather that information, you can import that over to your digital world. And I imagine your model would be much more robust and much more have broader applications in that case. But I think it's wonderful. What were the privacy implications there, out of curiosity?
I didn't hear what you
said. What were the
Oh.
privacy implications of that particular study?
Oh, yeah. I mean, what they did is LG had a sign up that this was a test location and the following things were happening. And if you were coming in, you were consenting to it in the same way that you see signs that say, in Macy's, for example, if you go to any Macy's today, they have signs that say, you are consenting to being videotaped because we videotape everything. And that's because of security and other reasons. But that's really what they had. They said a test is going on in this location and this is happening and you're just consenting to be part of it. And, consumers could have asked more questions, but I don't know if they did. Frankly, I don't know how much that they asked.
I think a lot of people don't ask, everyone's getting tracked these days on so many things that it's kind of hard to care because, you know, if you care about one, then you have to care about all of them. And it's like,
Well,
too many things to figure out of like what's tracking you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you know, the part two to this, just really quickly, is that you had mentioned the luxury furniture company and customer intent, right? You're talking about looking into the crib versus walking by it and whatever. That's exactly what LG was doing. I know that IKEA has had similar projects when they redid how rooms were displayed in their stores. They studied how people interacted with the furniture. Did they circle a dining table? Did they just look at it from a distance and then back up? You know, that kind of thing. And they used all of that data to reimagine how things were going to go. And they did transfer over to web. So I just love this kind of moment where we're seeing all of this stuff cycling around and, you know, some interesting things happening.
Yeah, especially from like where you guys sit on the agency side, there's when you control the experience. So like let's use the IKEA example because there's a good analogy here. Like let's say you're tasked with relaunching or doing a headless like microsite for some part of IKEA. When you take those insights of how someone browses a physical showroom and you're trying to do the design task of what should the product page look like for this experience, you have two goals of I want to make it usable and drive conversion, and I have this more subtle goal of I need to make it look and feel different from other product pages because that needs to be brand forward, right? The other third piece there is that you can put in that design of the page elements that both mirror how someone might browse that showroom, but also when they are used, they give interesting signal and insight that you can use to power downstream conversion. What I would call basically you're collecting your passive or relevant intent signals in a way, just like you said with like the LG example, but because your task is designing the product page, like you have the chance to kind of put in a very passive, beautiful way your ideal kind of triggers that let you in a very passive way filter someone down, right? Whereas a lot of cases as marketers, we tend to think of, fill out a form, give me an email, like, what's the conversion versus, something that's, especially for like considered purchases like furniture, especially like I know a ton about that industry now, but like things like that where people are buying something not just as a it's not a discretionary expense, it is a lifestyle. Like they're falling in love with a piece of furniture as a part of their home. It's a very emotional, a very very personal kind of experience. And when someone gets embedded in that kind of like aspect, they will also give information willingly. There's a term in the industry that I've seen, which I don't know if your users would know or not, but the idea of zero-party data, which is this concept of people first-party data, like I need to opt in to let me send you stuff versus like I rent a list. But then before that, you say, well, actually, I want people to tell me when they're in market. I want you to tell me your preferences and whatnot. There's a company called Octane AI that has made a they made a good business around kind of these quizzes on the site that are meant to segment your customers down and like give you richer insight. And there's a lot to that. I think that kind of like blunt interactions a little bit rough, especially for B2B. But there's things that are similar there, right? That you can kind of pull from that. You're basically creating a user experience that lets you gather these very critical data points that may be implicit, may be explicit, may be defined or not from someone that lets you just kind of suss them out in the crowd. And then as a marketer or someone that's optimizing the experience, you have to figure out what you want to do with that, right? And that's kind of the opportunity, like something like a Trellis has, for example.
Yeah. So I think in B2B though, there's a big opportunity to like. A lot of companies are still struggling to get the basics going, but if you can get that going, there's a big opportunity. We're talking to one, and they're a smaller company, right? Like, so sometimes these smaller companies have the advantage of just thinking about these things a little bit smarter and moving faster. They don't have like so much overhead. It's just like one guy that can make the decision and move it forward. So in his case, we're investigating a couple options around kind of like a part finder or like an engine type display, so they can kind of, like a lot of these parts and technical products can be very complicated. They might be a piece to 100 pieces, right? And you need almost like a visual representation to see how they all interact. And like, it's hard to know in your head all of them and how they all work together. Like, it helps to see the visual cue, and then that visual cue can lead you to all the different pieces, like kind of like a recommended products, or there's more and more stuff like that. And then obviously we have the AR, augmented reality, customization type stuff. It's kind of goes hand in hand. We have a furniture client like that actually, that has a pretty deep integration with 2 different technologies. And they're still early stage, right? We're definitely they haven't even tapped into what they could be doing, but at least now you can kind of more easily customize the furniture and see it kind of like in like a augmented reality kind of way. So I think all this stuff is there, and it can be done for B2B, but a lot of them just haven't even because they can't get the basics done. They can't. How can you do that if you can't even do the basics? You know what I mean?
I think, my observation, and I'll throw it back to you, Garrett, but my observation on this is that the B2B customers, the clients that I've worked with, the folks I've worked with, they often don't think how powerful the visual is in the way that it is in the B2C e-commerce world. The use of video, the use of a how-to, the 3D, the everything, the 360 views of here, I'll tell you just one quick thing that I think our listeners have heard before, but things like in plumbing or what have you, which are not necessarily exciting to people in the B2C world. In B2B, it's all about, well, exactly how do those fit together, and what does this do? And they need to see that view. They don't want to be like looking through some schematic or having to call somebody or even live chatting or whatever. They don't want to do that. They want to just see it. Can I look at this in 3D? Okay, that's what I need. Right?
And it's complicated, right? Like so yeah. I mean, I think you bring up a good point that I would argue it's actually almost more important to create these like intricate visual cues in B2B, because the things they're buying are complicated, and no normal person can just like perfectly visualize these things and type in a SKU number and buy it without, you need some reference, right? Or you could make the wrong purchase, buy the wrong part, and then you just wasted like weeks of time, which is not good for your business.
I think there's so much opportunity and where you guys are playing for around, I just call it the search experience, the search and discovery, interaction, right? Again, if I just think about in a very raw fashion what, a B2B org is, like it's really a sales org, right? They're used to, I pick up the phone, I holler at a customer, or I reply to a customer, and then I think about it and I engage, right? And then everything else around that is kind of like tools to help me do my job as a salesperson. But I think there's a lot of power in both being able to help the sales team translate what they've done to a digital fashion, as well as also using that digital journey experience, whatever, to make an elegant handoff to a sales team. Because I could see a big piece being, especially in some orgs you probably work with, of the sales team saying, you're going to take my commissions away, you're taking my customers away. But I think there's a way to, more so than your average consumer company, to start first with how do I think about search, and maybe not even search, but like it's the starting of, some might call it a product finder, just like that discovery process. I have a thing I need, or I have a need that I have a product need or pain that I need solved, and you as a supplier have a variety of ways to solve that, a lot of complexity. And that could end up looking like, some combination of a visually assisted search experience that maybe ties into a chatbot, for example. It's kind of what comes to mind immediately. What I was going to say is that where we've started and seen success and kind of doubling down is on, automating. And so we built kind of this using Google's Dialogflow toolkit to scale up chatbots and whatnot that can not just live on a chat, but they are meant to look at all kinds of communication between you and a prospect, in particular via email and chat. So if you're in a B2B context and you have someone that's engaging from chat, that's fine. You want to connect that to an agent, but you could also have the chance to have that system monitor the conversation and to be able to trigger actions, whether it's to help facilitate and scale. Usually for B2B sales, it's much more about I need to, trigger when I should get someone involved. So it's prospecting or kind of like a, what's the lead scoring, kind of qualifying basically. But you can use that to be able to help kind of augment where you might not be able to create the visuals, right? So a chat experience is a symbol, or email experience is a proxy that every salesperson is going to have. Starting with that as the fundamental, where can we start to blend what you would normally engage with a customer to something that's digitally interesting, that maybe starts to look like a search or recommendation or kind of discovery process. I think there's so much there. Not to mention just like a lot of off the shelf you can use. And the other cool thing from like the more previous point of for almost any sales org you go into, you could immediately take all the emails that have ever been had between your customers and your sales reps, which everyone, if they have an Exchange server, has that already in place. And you could seed a model that could help train that system. So out of the gate, you could bring simple insight. So you could start off by saying, look at all the information. Tell me tell me the kinds of customers that I should be interacting with. That helps you build the right user experience personas. But then that same, data that you start from an analysis standpoint could see the first, an agent, what I call it, that is going to guide and assist whatever experience you want to have, right? I agree with. I think there's a lot that can be done there, just from a B2B standpoint, more so than the consumer.
Really, really interesting. But I think a lot of B2B organizations might be making a big mistake in that we hear this all the time. Well, our customers know what they want, so it's like they're searching, or they see it as like, we need to build an infrastructure so they can go and quickly buy based on type this SKU in or kind of this basic data. And I think that could be a fallacy in that they're getting a lot of those orders, and there are people that know what they want or have very specific needs. But there's probably a huge chunk of B2B buying that's before that, where they're exploring and they're looking, and some of that might be happening on B2C websites like, Wayfair's of the world, the Staples of the world, of the Amazons of the world, which are now becoming B2B. So I think there's this whole exploratory phase that's happening. And a lot of B2B organizations don't even realize how big it is because they never built their business around it. So they just think all their customers know what they want and they're trying to design their business around that, versus there's actually a big chunk of exploration going on that they could be capturing.
Well, I'll give you one scenario that I was familiar with recently. It was a store display company. So B2B, I mean, really, it's just about as B2B as it gets. They really do almost nothing directly to consumer.
No person's going to buy their store display. Maybe,
I mean, it's like maybe you'll find a couple people, here and there. But it's really, a very focused thing. They had a website that had lots of static images, no videos, and no configurators, even though almost everything was customized or customizable. So, you go there and, like a sliding glass jewelry case you would see at a store, any of these things. They're like, we can do anything. We can do anything. And it's expensive. It's like thousands of dollars for this stuff. Yet you can't click and say, this size, mirror, not mirror, glass shelf, and see it. You cannot. There's no way to do it. So I'm like, well, if I'm spending thousands of dollars, where do I see it? Well, you don't, we'll show you maybe somebody who had something similar and send you a photo, and it's like, oh my God, I'm going to die, listening to this sort of stuff. And unfortunately, that's the norm for a lot of folks in that space. They haven't gotten even 2 or 3 steps ahead, let alone having a configurator that shows me in 3D what it might look like,
I actually have two points I can comment on that. So I'll give you one example from one of our own companies. So we own an art marketplace through a fund that I just started called Art House. It's a UK-based art marketplace. It's dropship, art, frame prints. Does very well in the UK, and our goal is to grow the US base, but also the trade business. So trade being designers that on a B2B that go search and buy on behalf of their design projects, of which is a significant chunk of opportunity in the U.S. and the U.K. But for that in particular, I could see it varying by category, because in a scenario where a designer knows the specifics of the artist and the trends and the whatever they want to type in, it's an SEO play, right? You're basically optimizing from paid search or Google Shopping, versus what I'm seeing more on the inquiries for our trade is they are higher up because of the nature of the catalog. No one has the knowledge of, well, I know I want these kinds of trends in art. There's this kind of like really interesting opportunity of, I have this abstract, project inquiry, which is I have a design aesthetic and I can tell you in the terms of what I want, what I'm trying to accomplish. And then I have like the art, the index that we're building needs to map that to that inquiry. And so that's one where, like, if they knew exactly what they're typing in, you're just bidding on the highest click for Google paid search. But if you can figure out how to get higher in the funnel or to create value in the engagement, so we're using that chat experience to create basically an augmented way for someone to come in from a trade request and say, I'm doing a client's room and I need, here's the color palette, and we want to do something fun and pink and humorous, or like use the words they would describe, but then meet that with like a way to help them kind of discover the catalog and interaction that is unique and different to that, right? There's in a similar way, there's probably other kinds of opportunities you're mentioning to move the B2B buying process higher up in the discovery process for that industry, in ways that I think, especially from an agency like Trellis, could bring to the client, both in execution and strategy, right?
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say is, like, the other point is that you mentioned a lot about AR as a way to help with configuration and to help with visualization. Totally agree. What I would also say is that you tend to see AR deployments where it's all this work and effort just to get it on the page. Everyone's so excited, and a handful of folks use it. But then what you're not doing is actually using that to start the conversation that you want to have, which is you should be having, you should have like a hook or an experience where you can't even get the AR object unless you start a chat conversation, right? Or text to start, an SMS delivery, and that hooks into your support chat system, because then you have a buyer that's self-selected into something that's very high intent. They're down the funnel. They want something that you have, which is, I have an asset or just a model that I want to show, and they're ready to engage in a mobile, right? So why not make the hook an SMS delivery for AR? They see on their phone, they close it, and then you immediately have the sales rep follow up and engage in a very active conversation. Because we saw with a lot of AR deployments at Vertebrae in particular is that while yes, in scale, people that click on AR are converting higher, it's still a small portion of people that are engaging with it. And so especially when you get down to smaller kind of like scenarios, like in the B2B case, again, the scale versus the complexity problem. Every time someone does engage with something like AR, it's a very valuable customer prospecting experience, and you should put all hands on deck to kind of create, a conversation with someone that's, qualified to close it,
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So tell us, what's your advice to kind of a B2B organization? I mean, I guess I'm kind of going to summarize what I'm taking away from this, and maybe you can expand on that, but sounds like because B2B organizations generally, and obviously there's always exceptions, probably have a little bit less volume of data. It's a little bit harder for them to just go completely off the data. So they need to kind of use a mixture of the data they have and qualitative. Maybe it's working with the sales reps and kind of marrying the data and their sales team or the people interactions together to make better decisions, and not go off one or the other, use them together. Is that kind of what you think B2B organizations should be doing a better job of, or kind of, yeah?
Sure. So your primary feedback mechanism should be qualitative in some way with some summarization. So what I mean by that is that you still want to encourage, primarily text-based engagement, chat, email, survey, because of the scale and the cost of getting engaged with the customer. but you want to summarize it or metric or baseline it in some way that you can see how that progresses, right? So an example is looking at all of our chats in the week, and we have some, simple models or keyword counters that let us see, did we go up or down by this concept or not, right? That's an easy way to start to create the kind of analytic cadence that you would see if you had a lot more data points. But it's also going to get you access to the qualitative and have a chance to create those conversations that spin off into deal cycles, right? The other one you can do there is customer forensics, which is most B2B orgs, have a very strong sense of who their customer is and usually have some extent of data on hand. A lot of it's email or chat. You can do some qualitative interviews with sales reps, but you're probably going to get more kind of like their bias versus, a lot of cases you can go enrich a profile, especially with B2B customers. Like you can go find their account, find like how they mix. Like there's a bunch of just data sitting out there on the web without even having to get, private sources to enrich the customer index that you can then use to go just run as a starting point, right? So like my advice for any B2B org would be, if you just were starting out with your customer analytics, timeline, I'd first get a sense of, well, do you have a way to classify your customers? Do you have what I would call taxonomy? Do you have a way that you group your customers by behaviors? And then do you have a way to talk about them, right? So like your classic, B2C companies like Bed Bath & Beyond, I guarantee you has their top 10 like personas of buyers, right? The CMO drives. I think in a B2B org, that's even more important because of the nature of understanding the complexity of how that customer is going to make decisions, whether on a website or really in a conversation. Getting that defined is pretty important, I think, and then starting to bring that into other areas, right? And the other thing I'd say is that this kind of,
I was going to say they also have a lot of ERP data. So a lot of these companies have data kind of stuck in these old systems, and they're not really doing that with it because it's like these old systems that are not good for data analytics. So not necessarily doing much with, but they potentially do have a decent amount of data in the system.
Yep.
I think they're going from a CRM mindset to I really want to call it like a CRM plus or like a digital first. Like they're coming from like meet them where they are, right? If they've got a CRM, if they're deep in size and they're now scaling into digital, they've got a place where they have customer information. By nature of like accounting has to do something with it, right?
Yeah.
So starting with that as a source is probably your best place to start thinking through where can we get access in the business to some kind of, record of customer behavior, even if we don't have event information, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, emails are great because of just the natural interaction. You can't retroactively go back and record phone calls, for example, but you could also, you could do spot references on sales folks for certain accounts that you want a detailed deep dive. So let's say you analyze your ERP and you come up with 5 classes of customer and you're trying to then put some characteristics on them, and you want to pull out the most canonical 3 customers in each grouping and go ask that sales rep a deep dive, right? Like that could be automated or semi-automated in a way that will get you a good kind of starting foundation for your customer, again, a taxonomy that then should feed everything else you do, right? From a user experience standpoint, it should be your flows. From a reporting standpoint, it should be how you talk about them. From a model standpoint, it should be how do you optimize towards them. All that kind of stuff really starts with and ends with the customer grouping, right? Like what the business thinks are their kind of customers, their thesis of customers, right?
So I've got 2 questions as we get a little bit closer to the end of the podcast. One of them is, I want to just give you an opportunity to talk, maybe very specifically about open conjecture. Like, who do you work with, and who's really the best, type of customer that you could possibly ask for? And then the second thing is just like kind of a look into the future. I love asking that of people, like, what do you see for B2B in 2 to 3 years or 3 to 5 years? So start with the open conjecture piece first. So I'd love for our listeners to just get a chance to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So open conjecture has been kind of in, I wouldn't call it stealth because it's been working with only like a handful of folks, but one of my main clients in the past year and a half or so has been this luxury furniture goods manufacturer in New York City. The kind of history for where OC came from is that we originally were building an agency around helping furniture manufacturers go direct to consumer, and then COVID hit and kind of like that kind of wound down, and so we kind of pivoted to focusing on the analytics technology that we're building out. But from a kind of like kind of canonical customer standpoint, what we've been doing just from a practice standpoint is helping stand up customer data solutions. So like what we are offering moving forward is managed analytics services and ongoing data enrichment. And so in particular, we're focused on standing up and helping customers move to their own data warehouse for storing customer information, primarily on Google Cloud. And then we are really focused on RudderStack, which is an open source CDP. And so helping clients that want to stand up and move, really kind of, a lot of folks that I talk with are wanting to either stand up or get better at their own in-house analytics. And so a lot of cases, they might be putting data into other third-party systems, or they don't really have any strategy by which they're managing customer information, let alone what do you then do with it. And so one of the first things that we do is we come in and we have a whole kind of wrapper around RudderStack, and we basically instrument the site. We replace segment. You can kind of cancel your account there, and you can save a bunch of money there, and also bring your data in-house. And then from there, we start to stand up and give the team the ability to start seeing and analyzing customer information around this taxonomy. So we help kind of look at your various data sources, like I was mentioning, and we will come in and create a set of groupings for your customers, and then we'll start to align those customer segments by analytics information on the website. And all flowing through to your data warehouse. So for teams that really want to again, that are usually what I'm looking for is like emerging mid-market retailers that are wanting probably to do something headless. So they're, they kind of outgrown Google Analytics, or they're having trouble kind of being able to get what they need from that standpoint, and they want to stand up and really take the next level. But finding talent is difficult. Being able to get the ability to just do the analytics plumbing to be able to get that off the ground. So all those things are kind of the common kind of projects that we would take on. And then moving forward, we help with the enrichment process. So as you learn to use your data warehouse and your analytics reporting, we help uncover both new segments, but also new types of enrichments. So like I was mentioning, that it could be models that extract certain kind of indicators from ongoing chats or texts or emails. It could be things scraped from the all flows through to your warehouse. And so we want to basically stand up those for customers and help them really kind of move their data analytics practice to the next level. So that's where we're focused.
That's pretty cool. And then the part two, I just want to give you an opportunity to say, if you're predicting the future of where things are going, just in B2B e-commerce in general, what do you think is a trend or something people might look for in the next couple of years?
Oh man, I think moving more predictive aspects into the sales planning process. So unlike B2C, where you have a faster turn and you tend to see things that are, let's A/B test the user experience and see the result. In B2B, you have longer sales cycles, you have more complex, delivery and supply chain. And so anything you can do to move more predictive aspects about what customer behavior is going to do higher up in the executive making process, I think that's going to be a strategic asset for any, it's a strategic asset for any business, but especially for someone that has, just a larger swing of cycle and kind of behavior for their customers. That's really important, right? And I think what's interesting is, where do you get the data that's going to power those models? So, we work a lot with Google Vertex, which is just their Google's new branding around their managed AI services. And so, there's already plenty of off-the-shelf models and resources that you can use to get to that goal. The challenge today is really around the plumbing and the how do I get the data in a structure and manner that is ongoing, recurring, and that I can use to power those teams, right? And so I think from a B2B standpoint, you'll see I want to unlock predictive insights, the role and influence of AI or just data scientists or people that care about a data story and what a model could do for the business is going to be important. And then empowering those individuals, right? So you see a lot of like companies like Dataiku or a lot of these kind of data science platforms are really scaling because the role of data analytics in organizations, not just in B2B commerce, but the B2B broad is, that's where they can start to get more signal and they're having the greatest impact. And I think that's where you'll see just the greatest lift, especially when you can start to help those organizations create triggered actions, right? So I think the other interesting impact in B2B is that because the action you want to create is talk to this customer in this way, and the natural form of engagement is an email or phone call. It doesn't have to be all the hoopla around a landing page and experience a campaign. I think you can move a lot more quickly than you would expect in a B2B context if done correctly, than say something more B2C where you have to create, because the touch point of the customer is so scaled out, you have to create all this overhead for interaction. It makes sense.
Yeah, I could see almost prediction around, the buying cycle, like, oh, this is someone that's going to buy fast, or this is going to be, 6-month buying cycle customer, like kind of almost figuring that out, earlier in the process with data. And then also probably some stuff around the supply chain, and the supply chain is so complicated. We're seeing more and more companies that are trying to sell and offer lead time and kind of like more like, because instead of saying everything's out of stock and just wait till it's back in stock, they're trying to kind of like pre-sell it and say it's going to be there in 4 weeks. But like I could see that process becoming kind of more automated and more accurate, where now they know instead of 4 weeks, they know down to the days when it's going to come, right? Like I could see that becoming more of an AI kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think just like in B2B, unlike a B2C, your biggest difference is your AOV and the impact that the incremental order can have, and moving that incremental order behavior is so much more significant for a B2B business than for a consumer business, right? So anywhere where you can see impact to that lever is going to guide everything. So that could be on supply chain, where that gives you better pricing ability. So for example, that give you better, I don't know how much that would affect, say, availability or a product, assortment, but on the, being able to know who you put that inventory in front of at the right time. Just again, I mean, that's simple. We talk about like that's what you want to do in e-commerce, but I think just the nature of that lever is going to have a larger impact. Also, the cool thing is that in a B2B standpoint, because the lever is larger, there's more value, and you can get more people's time involved with each push. So every incremental order you can move through, if you can get really good at predicting the likelihood of close, you can align your sales team's time towards the most valuable prospects, more so than you can with a B2C standpoint, where it's just the scale is different, right? And so I think that's both kind of what's like, I think the more the challenges in B2B, because you have this like old sales organizations and mentality. But I think you could turn on its head and say that's actually an opportunity, because that your sales team is the one that's also the most motivated to help move into the digital channel and make the number and grow. Like, how do you find scenarios where it's a win-win on both sides, of allowing them to be able to do what they've done even better, but also to accelerate the business with where the consumer is pulling them, or the customer is pulling them, which is really what a lot of assuming the B2B transformations is kind of being driven, right? Like, you have these organizations that are maybe I wouldn't say like being brought kicking and screaming into the world of digital, but their customer expectations is probably driving a lot of the timing of what they would prefer, right?
Yeah, the competitors too, the Amazons. I mean, Amazon's essentially the biggest B2B e-commerce seller at this point. like their B2B channel is massive. It's I think it's the fastest growing of the part of the company in terms of e-commerce for them. So yeah, this was awesome. So Garrett, conscious of time here, how do people find you? It sounds like, if they need help with analytics, especially enterprise analytics and data, you're the guy to talk to. So
yeah. If they are wanting to move to an in-house analytics team, or the buzzwords be they want a modern data stack, and you don't have the resources, or you don't really know where to start, would love to have a conversation. The new website will be up by the time this podcast goes up, and I'm Garrett at openconjecture.com.
Awesome.
That is wonderful. It's such a pleasure to have you. I'm glad we found each other on LinkedIn, right? I mean, it was just really great. It's great that we did bump into each other there. It's fantastic.
I appreciate it. It's been so wonderful, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.